You've heard it a million times. Watercolor is supposed to be loose and free. But what if I told you this advice could actually be holding you back? So many artists try to loosen up but end up feeling lost instead. And I think that's because loosening up is a trap and makes beginners think that there shouldn't be any structure when in fact watercolors thrive on balance. And today I'll show you a simple 3-step painting system that works for anything you might want to paint to make it look realistic while still keeping watercolor's natural flow. Hi, I'm Françoise. Welcome back to my channel. This is your go-to space for watercolor and watercolor pencil art that's both loose and realistic. I teach my painting system on Patreon and more in depth with specific themes in all my courses. And I'll make sure to link all of that in the description below. So let's dive in. Did you ever start a painting, got halfway through, only to realize that there's something missing or something's not quite right? Don't worry, because that happens to everyone. There's something you can do to avoid this problem, and it's to keep everything as simple as possible. That's why the first step in my system has to do with everything that comes before painting. First, the reference photo, if there's any. Besides selecting a photo that you like, try and overlook any detail that bothers you or just crop the photo to match your preferences better. It seems simple, but in most cases, I've found that it works like a charm because a cropped photo can feel easier or more appealing to paint than its original. Painting success with watercolors also starts with a simple sketch, and you'll notice that a quick outline is often enough. Think of every stroke you make as a landmark to help you place your main colors later on and actually get started somewhere. This should be the purpose of a sketch and why it should always be simple. We want to train ourselves to forget about the details in the reference, especially when painting something like a landscape or a still life. Portraits are always going to be a bit more demanding sketch-wise, but they can still remain pretty minimalistic for painting. Even more important are the colors, and I insist that you really want to keep your palette limited to a few colors. That's what a lot of other artists recommend, and I couldn't agree more. Because the more colors, the more of a headache it's going to be for you to decide where to add what. Having a bunch of colors also makes it harder to keep good color harmony across a painting. Imagine, for example, selecting 3 greens for this landscape, besides other colors, of course. Imagine that it's possible that these 3 different greens mean 3 different yellows and 3 different blues, maybe even some other colors, which now makes not 3, but at least 6 colors, if not much more. And to avoid getting into such a headache, this is what I do. I observe the reference and I identify the main colors I'm seeing at a quick glance. A quick glance because we don't want to overanalyze the colors. So I see green. A great deal of it looks more like yellow, some is just green, and some looks more like a dark brownish green. I also see a lot of light and dark browns. To have the most variety in my painting while sticking to a very limited palette, 3 to 5 colors, I decide to go with a bright yellow, a vivid green, and a sepia color. Sepia will be great for shadows because it's so dark. But the problem is, I think it might make the browns in my painting a bit boring, so I decide to add quinacridone sienna, one of my favorite colors for vibrant landscapes. Now let's touch on color mixing. By leveraging that, you can see it's possible to get a bunch of natural colors from just 4 main ones. And remember that adding more or less water to your paint mixes can make a color look lighter or darker too. That's even more possibilities to work with in your painting. So now we have a bunch of gorgeous colors that will be our midtones. We also have a dark brown color, sepia, our dark tone. And we can leverage paper white highlights or use white gouache or something similar for the light tones. Having this light, mid, and dark tones is very, very important for overall balance and harmony in any painting with any style. And for realism, it's going to be great because we're able to create high contrast between the bright paper white highlights and the very dark sepia color. Just a note, I could have included blue along with yellow, quinacridone gold, and sepia, and skipped green altogether if there had been a sky or any need for blue, or if I had just decided I liked the idea of adding blue. Just to say, and I think that's important, that there is no right answer to what color you pick, no right color palette to match a specific photo. It really depends on the person, what colors they have, and what they prefer. So now we have a simple foundation. Let's talk about how to structure the painting itself. It can be tempting to jump straight into painting the fun details, but doing that can make the process feel overwhelming because we don't always know what to start with and what order to do it in. And that's why a lot of artists do what I'm going to share for the good reason that it works. And that is getting into the habit of working from background to middle ground to foreground. This means you start with a big picture mindset by forgetting about the details at first. With my painting, I have more of a background and foreground, not really a middle ground, although I could add one if I wanted to. And that's why, at first, you see me blocking all the main colors that represent the foliage in the back. It's pretty much everything that's behind the main subject, the branch and focus. Here I decided that I wanted to be more creative and go loose on that background, to not stick to the photo too much. That's why I'm working over the entire area with the goal of ending up with a bright, vibrant background that has some depth to it thanks to that dark sepia that I have. To achieve all of that, I'd recommend to push the initial layer a little further by adding more paint to your mixes, little by little, and keep working on wet for as long as possible. If you're still in the beginner stages and you use paper that can handle a lot of water, like my 100% cotton ash cold pressed paper, it will be easier to do. And if the sheet dries too fast because you're not as comfortable as me yet with painting with water and managing the paint at the same time, you can still dry your paper completely, wet it again, and keep working on it and repeat multiple times without damage to the paper. I love to paint all in one go now on wet paper because I've learned to master the water and how fast it's drying and what to do to actually keep the paper wet longer. For someone with less experience, I understand that it's going to be harder to do, more intimidating, and that's why it will be less stressful to break this down into layers. It works just as well, doesn't make any difference in the end, so don't fret. Notice I've been focusing on the background and avoiding the branch, even though some colors have bled into it. As long as they're light, that's actually great for more color harmony and naturalness of the painted landscape. I also took care of leaving bright white areas in the background, and whenever I want to get whites back, I know that I can still use the lifting technique. Notice as well that even though there is less and less water with richer and deeper colors as a consequence, I don't go too dark just yet. And when I add some shadows, I do it carefully. Always saving adding more darks for the third and final step in the system. If the background stays fairly light and bright, you can be sure that a darker, more detailed subject like the branch will pop against it. That is how you keep the looseness of watercolors while staying true to a more realistic style, if of course that's your thing. Keep in mind it could be the opposite. You could have a dark background with a very light subject. That's what happened with this beautiful wolf I painted for an exhibition. This approach from background, the foliage, to foreground, the branch, also works because it keeps the painting structured from the start, and it keeps your focus super sharp with one thing to work on at a time. Now the background and later the branch. When the structure is in place, it's time for the final stage, realism and maximum impact. And if you're like me, you're not going to want to miss this because that's what brings the painting together. Because have you ever looked at your painting and feel like it's missing something? Maybe it's just bland, boring, or just flat. So there are usually two case scenarios here. Maybe not enough shadows, not enough details, and it's just very boring, very bland. Or there's too many shadows, too many details, and nothing pops. This is when, if you like loose realism in your paintings, exactly what I teach here and in all my courses, try and paint from references that have at least one thing that's going to be in focus, so that the rest of the painting, the loose part, gets a chance to shine against the more detailed subject and vice versa. My point here is to show you that both background and branch benefit each other. They work together. It's those two things together that make an impact while preserving watercolor's beautiful loose effects. I already managed to block in some of the moss while the paper was wet because I wanted some looseness to it, and when the sheet is wet but close to drying, it's the perfect time to add that kind of stuff. And that's why now I can go heavier on the shadows, with sometimes my dark sepia, sometimes a mix of sepia and quinacridone sienna for gorgeous reddish browns. And notice that also keeps the color harmony going between background and foreground, because we're finding the same colors in both. I leverage water to create lighter versions of those dark colors, and if applicable, I know that I can also leave some bare areas here and there. They act as natural highlights since we already know that they can only pop against the very dark tones. Another thing with this stage is to add crisp details sparingly, just enough for realism, but not too much because it might make the painting feel super tight. And again, disrupt that sense of balance with a loose but deep and rich background. Here, these details are my very dark and fine branches that I add in places, as well as some lines that I make to create a trunk texture. I love to soften parts of those additions because playing with a combination of soft and hard edges also helps with keeping a painting loose and realistic all at once. I explained that in detail in previous video, and I teach it. This lighthouse course that I made is a great example of loose realism. Whenever you can, ensure that there are sharp highlights in your painting for that final glow, and there are many ways to create them. Here, I just start lifting color in places and it will be enough for me. Amplifying highlights or planning for them ahead of time like I did always works because it will bring out the shadows even more, which adds depth and makes the painting feel more realistic overall, more striking. I loved painting this branch. It's really one of my favorite things to do, trees, forests, so I hope you've enjoyed it too. Please let me know what your biggest takeaway is in the comments. I would appreciate that. And to take it a bit further, I can recommend this video here. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.